Okay, I think we're going to kick off because we only have an hour with our amazing panel, and hopefully more people will join us as we go through. So, welcome everybody to this Net Zero Terrace Streets live Q&A session. My name is Poppy Maltby. I'm the head of local energy at Regen. We've been working with Rossendale and the team as part of Net Zero Living programme run by Innovate UK, and I'm really excited to be chairing this session today, hoping as most of you will be to hear more about how this really ambitious and exciting project has been progressing. Just to take you through the panelists for the Q&A today, on the next slide. Here we go. We've got Louise Marix Evans from Rossendale Valley Energy. She's going to be talking more about the financial model, governance and service delivery. Bill Proctor from Borough Happold, the techno-economic model. Andrew Pinchers from Rossendale as well. We're going to be talking about the demonstrator projects and retrofit coordination. Natalie Whitham from Rossendale Borough Council is going to be giving us the local authority perspective, and Phoebe Andrew from the Centre of Energy Equality is going to be talking about the digital journey and the Fairer Warmth app. So each panelist is going to be giving a quick overview to introduce themselves today. But as it's a live Q&A event, we really want to hear questions from you all and questions that you want to pose to the panel directly. So we're going to be doing this with the Q&A function on Zoom. This is Q&A, not the chat function, just to highlight that. And there are all sorts of things you can do with that Q&A function. You can view questions. You can upvote other people's questions, the most salient, the ones you really want answered, which I'll be keeping an eye on and then posting to our panelists. Can we just have that slide up again so people know? There we go. So yes, you can also comment on the question and put your own questions in. So while I hope you're going to start doing this in the Q&A function, I'm going to get going and go straight to the panelists for their introductions and initial questions. So Louise, I think you're going to be asking our first question about how the project originated and evolved.
Thanks, Phoebe. Thanks, Poppy, and hello, everybody. Joseph, if we can have the slides that talk about the project, that would be great. Yeah, I'm Louise Marix Evans. I'm working on this project as a strategic director on Net Zero Terrace Street for Rossendale Valley Energy. And so how did the project evolve? In 2022, there was a community renewal fund bid in for Rossendale that asked the question, how do you decarbonise Rossendale? And partners involved in that, including Borough Happold, Centre for Energy Equality, the Council, and the precursor for Rossendale Valley Energy, called Valley Heritage, looked at that problem and identified 40% of the houses in Rossendale are terraces, built pre-1900, cold stone, damp, hard to heat, and in an area that doesn't have a lot of money to throw at housing retrofit or low carbon heating systems. So they weren't really uptaking some of the funding on offer. That came up with the solution that I'd like to see on a slide displayed, please, to the person driving the slides. So the answer to that was seen as, so how do we compete with the gas? So we come up with a model which is shared ground source loops connected to shared boreholes, providing heat through a small ground source heat pump that's situated inside the house, not outside, because there's not room for air source heat pumps on a little terrace. Smart hot water tank, solar PV on the roof if it's the right kind of roof, and sufficient retrofit. So the retrofit designed around the size of the heat pump to keep you warm and cozy and enable you to preheat the house away from expensive times of electricity and stay warm. Plus enough ventilation, because we do get a lot of black mold around here in these wet, damp stone houses in Lancashire. That's connected to a smart energy system because we've got to tackle the spark gap, the fact gas is much cheaper than electricity by unit price. So connected to a system of community energy and that shared solar, we could flex and move the electricity demand around, kind of forming an energy club. And the profits made from that flexibility would be recycled to the community rather than being extractive. So we went on to succeed in various funding bids through SIF, Strategic Innovation Fund from Ofgem, Innovate UK funding, and then we're moving into Network Innovation Allowance funding with Electricity Northwest. So there's a lot of work going on around the smart energy system and the data, the engagement piece, getting people signed up, and then the physical works to the houses. And the kind of big exam question for us is that we have to borrow that money over the long term because we don't want people to have to pay an upfront cost for it because they can't afford it. That investment would be pinned to the borehole infrastructure and paid back through a standing charge, a bit like the standing charge people pay now for electricity or gas, plus their electricity bill over the long term. So a lot of our work has been around modelling that technical and financial modelling to say, how can we make that standing charge affordable? Because it is really hard to do at the moment. If it was possible, everyone would be doing it. So that's where we're at, really exciting. And you'll hear more about it from everyone else. So I hope that's answered the kickoff question.
Lovely, thank you, Louise. And I'm afraid we weren't able to share the slide, but we will be, I'm sure, sharing them around the participants later, and we will see if we can solve that technical issue. So next on to Phil, who's going to be talking about the techno-economic model. Your kickoff question was around the DNO involvement. How do you get them to be involved and understand the value of this work to them?
Thanks. So as Louise just touched on, there's this funding, but there's also innovation funding from the DNO. So we were able to fund an element of, particularly around the smart systems development and the techno-economic modelling through strategic innovation funding. That was directly sponsored and led by Electricity Northwest, but it was also supported in terms of sponsorship by Northern Power Grid and UK Power Networks. So we already have 3 DNOs directly involved in the project. Why are they interested in it? Well, for a number of reasons. The DNOs in the UK have an interest in community energy schemes and community energy integration. They have a direct interest in fuel poverty alleviation, localized deployment planning around what their networks need to do at the local level to support the adoption of low carbon technologies. And they find this particular solution around addressing certain niche areas, if you like, of properties that can't decarbonize through normal routes, such as adopting air source heat pumps. There needs to be different approach to modelling and evaluation of how to do that. It still requires delivery in this terms of this modelling of solar PV, of heat pumps, of understanding the size and nature of the operating system. But in addition to that, there's a particular interest in the Smart Local Energy System component, the SLES, in terms of providing flexibility into the network as well. ENWL under Network Innovation Allowance, which is just, we've got a kick-off meeting on Monday for that, for 12 months of funding. I'm particularly interested in integrating a flexibility response mechanism between the DNO and that SLES system to deliver flexibility into the network, and how much flexibility they could leverage from a behind-the-meter solution, such as the Net Zero Terrace solution. So that flexibility interface isn't going to be entirely just tied exclusively to Net Zero Terrace. It can be applied wider than that, but it's a way of getting more heat pumps connected into networks, more solar PV connected into networks, and more homes to come off gas and to decarbonise. So that concept of a local system at the grid edge that can provide intelligence and response to the DNO at that level is of key interest to them to understand. So that's why they're continue to invest in our time as well to understand that point.
Lovely, thanks, Phil. That's a good starter. There's lots of other questions, I'm sure, coming in on that one. Just a reminder, yeah, we've got 3 questions at the moment in the Q&A function. If you want to ask further questions, please put them in that, upvote other people's, and we will carry on with the panel introductions. So, Andy, you are involved in the demonstrator projects and the retrofit coordination. Can you tell us a bit about what measures have been installed in these demonstrators? How invasive was it? How do your residents feel?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Poppy. I'm Andy. I'm the Operations Director at Rossendale Valley Energy. And as some of you will know, during previous webinars and through other meetings, we've got 3 properties that we're working on as part of this Innovate UK funded project that we're essentially testing out this methodology on, where we're trying to putting retrofit measures in and installing low carbon tech in there. So the basis behind this, I guess, as well, is to kind of keep that disruption as minimal as possible. That was kind of one of the ethos points that we went in with. And you know, the measures that we've got into some of these properties already, you know, the standard loft insulation, the basements have been insulated and made airtight, general air tightness throughout the property as well. Install new pipe work, new radiators in anticipation of the ground source heat pump that's going in. And we've also put in some insulation in one of our properties that had a very small extension on the back, which was, you know, there was space constraints in terraces anyway, but this extension was very small in of itself. So we've had a look at how we go through that, and looked at kind of newer materials that are out there, like aerogel as a method of doing this, and as this scales up, it's something that we can have a look at, kind of helping mobilize that supply chain. As alluded to as well, we've put in the decentralized mechanical ventilation with heat recovery in as well, that have gone into the properties to help with that kind of air changes and ventilation and air quality. We're still to put in a few measures. We've got the heat pump that needs to go in, and we've got windows and doors that have still needing to go in, mainly due to supply chain pressures. But a couple of the doors are bespoke. Some of the sizes of the entryways aren't standard, so they've had to be made especially for this. In terms of invasiveness, you know, I've listed a whole raft of measures we've put in. You know, there were a few things, you know, when we went to do roof insulation, a lot of lath and plaster there. That when they started knocking away that kind of ceiling space, it was incredibly messy. Thankfully, one of the properties was void that we were working in, which then kind of informed our decisions as we were moving into similar archetype properties to kind of transpose across. So we knew kind of what was there going into them, so that we could then make adjustments and make sure that we were kind of changing what we were doing so that we weren't disrupting the residents that were in there too much. So yeah, it's progressing well. There's a few things that still need to go in, but it's good. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Natalie, on to you now. From the local authority perspective, we had a question before around how you get local authorities to have ambition in this area and a taste for innovation itself.
Thanks, Poppy. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Natalie. I'm Net Zero Street Officer at Rossendale Borough Council. I've been in this post for almost a year now, but I came on board essentially as part of the Innovate UK funded project for Net Zero Terrace Streets. But as a whole, Rossendale Borough Council have been actively living and breathing this kind of innovative solution, I guess, for a number of years. And Louise has already touched upon how we came to be involved initially. Sometimes local authorities can be cautious, they can favour incremental change, especially smaller local authorities with limited resources. We are quite a small local authority, and in that kind of cautiousness, it can make the implementation of more agile, innovative projects more of a hurdle. As I mentioned, we're small, but we describe ourselves as an ambitious council, and we've found that cultivating that appetite for innovation and collaboration is possible. From our experience, we have 3 key learnings. Firstly, it really helps to have support from the top. It makes a huge difference. We're fortunate at RBC to have strong support from our political leadership, the Chief Executive and the Director for Economic Development, who've been really instrumental in progressing this along. Secondly, we've proactively connected with colleagues across different departments, housing, finance, legal, planning, and so on. That has been a game changer. So when everyone understands the why behind what we're doing, they feel involved, there's collaborative problem solving and a willingness to explore new approaches. And that obviously helps to secure buy-in. And by building capacity within the respective teams, you would have a smoother and more closely aligned process. And a really key factor in making that progress is having dedicated officers right here in the council team specifically focused on this project. So that at the moment is myself, but I work very closely with our partners at RVE, and we also have support from our climate change officer as well. And thirdly, emphasising the benefits that align with local authorities. For us, tackling fuel poverty, improving health and updating our old housing stock, they've been powerful motivators. It's fundamentally for us about how we can make a difference to people's lives and the well-being of the people who live here, and not just about hitting those carbon reduction targets, even though they're extremely important too. Through all of this, we started small and built confidence along the way. That's been a solid strategy. Not every innovative project needs to be a massive undertaking from the outset. Pilot projects can help councils to test new approaches, see the benefits firsthand, and build that internal confidence before scaling up. And for us, that was our initial work in, the Community Renewal Fund, and also supporting RV and delivering energy advice in our communities. And I suppose looking at how other local authorities can do this, I think it comes down to a few key things. So showcasing successes, highlighting the direct benefits to strategic goals, offering easy entry points for collaboration, building trust, ensuring clear communication, create internal champions within your council, and frame these partnerships as opportunities for the empowerment of your communities. So, yeah, thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Natalie. And now on to, I guess, last but not least, people in this. So I'm going to go over to Phoebe, who's going to tell us a little bit more about this digital journey and Fairer Warmth app.
Hi, thank you, Poppy. So I'm Phoebe. I'm the Energy Systems Specialist at the Centre for Energy Equality. And I think as Natalie has just alluded to, and all of us, it's a very complicated project. And when you have to come up with a holistic solution, we've been taking these learnings and trying to turn it into as neat of a package as we possibly can so that we can scale this across the UK. And that has been the core piece of all of us working together. So as part of this, we have been developing our platform, Fairer Warmth, specifically for Net Zero Terrace Streets. And I know a couple of you on the call are actually using Fairer Warmth, but for anyone who doesn't know, it's CEU's platform for enabling energy advice within a community. So that's working with the local authorities and community energy groups that know their community and trying to build a system that can help them do their work with more ease and more effectively. So that's taking the householder, having them take their first step on the energy journey and understand the support that's actually available. And then we have a champion system that enables that in-person energy advice and the caseload management. And then we have the admin side of things that actually provides oversight to the organisations of what is going on in their community. How can we build local support options and streamline reporting, manage champions, all of that good stuff. So with that basis, we have then been taking the learning from the Net Zero Terrace Street project and building a whole new world within Fairer Warmth that is hopefully going to be leading these new communities on the 7-stage process, which I think we might go into more detail in the future. But yeah, so adapting the platform so that we can actually bring in all of our learnings from the demonstrator homes and tackle that engagement piece. So it's been a real back and forth in terms of learning on the project, understanding the operational governance, and knowing how we can adapt our system to enable that and provide that toolkit so that we can actually do all of the hard work first and then actually provide it as a place-based solution across the UK. So that includes things like a whole new suppliers section so that we can actually have bookings, we can start these assessments so that we can go into the mobilisation stage within this project, and managing clusters and whole new sections that will take the householders on that journey. So yeah,
fantastic.
It's been a really good process.
Sounds very comprehensive as well. That's great. So we've got 10 questions in. So if anybody has more questions, please do put them in. And we have one that is floated to the top. It's quite a techie one, so I think this is going to Phil and or Louise. So it's talking about the financial return and social value. They want to know what the IRR and social value outputs from the project feasibility studies are and how might they map to known thresholds for future funding. Hope that makes more sense to you than it does to me, but I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll go at it. So the IRR, we'll be publishing outputs from the techno-economic modelling as part of the Net Zero Living project later in latter months of the project. But the IRR varies is the short answer. So in some cases it's negative and in some cases it's positive, depending on the cluster size and the model for funding. So if you're looking at a fuel poor area with no upfront costs to consumers, which is one of the options that we've been modelling. So everything's incurred in terms of paid for by the model, then recovered through a standing charge. The model shows that under that circumstance, there's a level of grant funding that's required to be provided into the model to make it work. Whilst for other segments where you're targeting perhaps a more affluent community, there is the option to put equity into the model and to also recover higher bills actually as well. So this is very geographical, dependent on bill paying and levels. So for example, in Baker, the average bill is £1,600 a year. So it's quite a low threshold to work with in terms of a return. Other areas will be a higher threshold to work with in terms of pinning to the bill. So that can improve the IRR. We're talking to National Wealth Fund. Abundance is working on the financial model. We're talking to investors. There are different levels of criteria depending on the type of financial organisation that you're working with. And we're also looking at the bundling aspects of the model as well. So what we mean by that is that we can wrap it all up as if a pseudo S-scale model where one delivery company provides it and then look at the return on investment for that. But of course, the component for Net Zero Terrace includes solar PV, energy storage, flexibility and management. So there are aspects of the model that make a very, very strong IRR based on well-proven models. And there are other aspects of the model that may make a loss, and those are blended. The other area of complexity that we are looking at is cross-financing between clusters. So the initial phases of Net Zero Terrace are likely to cost and are likely to require grant funding to make them work. But as they stabilise and we get more clusters, you can cross-invest from one cluster to another, and that improves the business case in terms of refinancing as well. We're talking to investment companies. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. There are different funding mechanisms and the IRR varies, and we're seeing negatives up to then an IRR 2 and an IRR 4, depending on which scenario we're running under the techno-economics. The other thing to quickly mention is that the cost basis is really, really tough. So there's not a lot of data out in the UK wide on the cost of retrofits, the cost of measures, cost of deployment, cost of street works, cost of drilling boreholes, planning. So we're collecting detailed cost analysis right at the moment, collating that, working with 3 Home demonstrator, working with supply chain to refine those costs to improve that model, which is why we're reluctant to release outputs at the moment until we get that cost base firmed up.
Lovely, thank you, Phil. That's Yeah, that's a good answer. I was thinking that, yeah, it sounds like an incredibly complex model going on there. Our next question was more around the networked heat pump system. Why was that the solution that was decided on, and were there other sort of heat technologies or solutions considered?
I can talk about some of the history behind the initial studies that we did. We looked at a variety of different heating system options. And when we did the original study in Baker for the particular cluster of terraced homes, we came out with more than one option for heating those homes. And it really broke down to spatial constraints. So we couldn't put air source heat pumps into those particular homes, which drove us to look at alternative solutions. In Baker, we looked at a centralised air source heat pump, potentially supported by ground heating as well solution, and a shared network that was actually proven to be viable from a techno-economic model in that particular area. The problem you have with rolling that out more widely is that you don't have room for the energy centre everywhere. So that particular location had an old structure and some wasteland next to it where you could have put that energy centre. But if you're looking for a more let's say generic model for constrained streets, you need to look at space constraint, and the ambient loop system worked really well for that because you don't need the energy centre and you could put heat pumps into homes. The other technology we've looked at is the electric boiler, which is cheaper to buy and put in and replaces existing combi boilers. But it costs 3 times to 4 times as much to run than the ground source heat pump, so it puts bills right up. So we have discounted that, in fact, using that effectively as the revised counterfactual for our model to say, well, if these houses really do get stranded and their only alternative is to buy an electric boiler and put it in, and that pushes their bills up because of coefficient performance of 1, what does that mean for them in terms of pushing them into fuel poverty? So that's why we've selected the ambient loop system to pull that efficiency back into the system and pull it down. So those effectively are the 3 options on the table: centralised air source heat pump, shared ground loop heating, or an electric boiler.
Lovely. Thank you, Phil. Is there anybody else from the panel that wanted to come in on the energy solution?
I think because it's so, oh, sorry, Poppy.
Sorry, yeah,
I think
no,
because parts of Rossendale are so rural, and centralised heat networks we're not going to get one up there anytime soon, and people are going to have to make the change as Phil said to electric and the electrification quicker than these centralised heat networks will get there. So I think having this kind of as a solution helps with these kind of, it's not necessarily rural, but these kind of areas that don't have these big heat sinks that can kind of help with that.
Thanks, Andy. And I think the next question is probably coming to you. It was asking around the sort of how much cheaper is it to do the street versus an individual house retrofit? What have you been working on in the model on that?
I think there are levels of economies of scale with this. I think that's kind of the answer to the question. I mean, individually, I think inherently, if you do this house by house, then it would end up costing quite a lot of money. But the economies of scale come with drilling boreholes, for example. A lot of that kind of cost is to do with the mobilisation, getting things on site, your big water tanks, your compressor, the drill rig. If you have to keep bringing that backwards and forwards, then the costs start to add up. We've been told through with drillers that there's up to a 50-60% decrease in cost for that if you were to do that at scale. So if we were to drill holes all the way down the street rather than just doing 1 or 2 for people that might sign up initially, then having to come back, then we can massively reduce the costs of that. These economies of scale around the procurement in general of bulk buying things potentially. If you know that you're going to this area, you're targeting a cluster of people, and you can start to build that and build that trust within the local supply chain. That kind of the measures will be coming in, they'll be there and they'll be ready for you to go. Same with solar panels and scaffolding and those kind of things. There are those economies there. yeah, like I say, I think there's bits and pieces where we can look to save money. As Phil said, we're refining that as we're working through the demonstrator properties, seeing what we can kind of pull together, having those conversations with contractors and suppliers to kind of bottom out exactly how much cheaper it will be and how many people that we'd need, kind of realize what that would look like.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to respond to Louise's prompt to maybe talk a little bit more about communities. We have a question around how to cope with householders that don't want to participate, that's on the list, but also perhaps talking about how people are expected to sign up to this and become part of it, and doing that in a sort of planned and phased way, and how much that contributes to your model, I guess. Louise, did you want to come in on that one?
Shall I kick off and then hand to you,
Yeah.
Phoebe? Yeah, I didn't want to lose the fact that we've looked at this from a people point of view as well as the technical point of view. So the way of doing engagement is it's called reach, engage, retain. And so that initial reach would be done sort of through events, through the work of local energy champions, through those conversations that might run down a street, to get people to think about what they might want, what they want out of their home. And it's of course designed to be multi-tenure. So lots of schemes are very much targeted either at owner occupiers or private rented or social housing. And this would work for any of those. So the approach would be using the Fairer Warmth app. And so the community energy champion would start reaching out across an area, and you might get a champion from within that street who says, oh, I found out about this, talking to the neighbours, answering questions, and then getting people's data into the Fairer Warmth app, pulling together how much are they paying for their bills at the moment, and then beginning to sort of understand what the scheme looks like, to get sign up, do a few sample surveys, begin to work up the costings for that, but also understanding the people and what some of their concerns might be. So that's a really key part, and it gives a community agency. So to Carlton's question, which is further down, not everyone would need to sign up in one go. We think it's about a third of people down a street at the moment. The boreholes would go in and then people could join subsequently in a second wave. So that might be when someone moves house, for example, or they notice it's working for the neighbours and then they want to sign up. So it's around that kind of agency, and it's quite agile. You don't have to wait for a big district heating scheme to come your way, and you don't all have to act individually. And we know that that sort of peer support could work. In a previous session, someone said, well, what if I hate my neighbours? I don't want anything to do with them. It can also work if you feel like that. So there'd be that contact through the app and the contact through the energy champ, and that community feel of, we know with broadband for rural North, getting a critical mass of people signing up and enthusiastic and doing something is brilliant. So we would be aiming to move that into this programme.
Phoebe, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just leading on from that is the energy champion, and the community aspect of this is huge, and it's holding the technical side of things with what is wanted in the community. So we don't need the whole street, and we're working out what that threshold needs to be. But the beauty of this scheme is that the community themselves also have the power to say, we want you to come to our street, by increasing the engagement and signing up. And so it's this kind of interplay with understanding technically where are the best places to target and get the energy champions out there and see what the community is giving back. So this whole process is a feedback loop of understanding what can be done on a technical front and what can be done on the community level for the householders. So it's kind of making sure that information flow is going both ways, and it's not this ultimatum of we're doing retrofit to you, which I think a lot of communities have been burnt by. And we're lucky to have a number of communities on board who are able to say that this is how your wording would be received if it's worded in this way, and understanding how to talk to communities. And that's where doing the local energy advice demonstrator with Rossendale Valley Energy has been so useful to just see how can we bring this to the community, and how can we word this and provide this in a way that means there is this back and forth, there is building trust, even if it means it takes a little bit slower, the process is a bit slower. How can we make sure that this is going to stick, and it's not an ultimatum? You know, people can come in when they are then convinced, if they are then convinced.
Great. And we have a question that sort of alludes a little bit to the sort of the legacy and the ongoing support for the project, and maybe it's a good point to bring Natalie in as well. Like, do they have will they have a caseworker? Will this be a sort of a council or community responsibility to maintain that, you know, the engagement that you're building up initially?
Yeah, thanks, Poppy. There's definitely a role for the council to continue playing in that regard. I think we're quite well placed as a kind of local trusted voice to be able to facilitate that sort of ongoing reach, engage, retain methodology, and also just acting as kind of a point of contact for any issues that are sort of wider than you know, the essential deployment of Net Zero Terrace Streets is key as well. But yes, there absolutely is a role for a council within that.
We should pop in and say the model isn't just fit and forget and go away. So it would involve setting up a local organisation or working with an existing local organisation, probably relatively not-for-profit or community benefit, because of that recycling of funds back into the community to keep the charges low. But so we are modelling for an ongoing operational company running, maintaining and looking after the system, and adding new customers, doing the maintenance, hand-holding people as winter hits, hand-holding people who might be moving into a house with the system. So the energy champion role would endure over the whole period of, you know, the next 40 years or whatever. So that would be like your help desk or someone to bob round, check in on you. It's also monitored remotely in terms of the smart system, and the monitoring would be like, Phil isn't heating his house. What's going wrong? So we could work out whether something's gone wrong technically, or whether the person's underheating, perhaps, because we know that might even happen. Certainly in Warm Homes prescription, they found that even when people had been provided with money for heating, they still underheated their homes because of worries about money, or not appreciating the importance of keeping warm and understanding the system. So we would have those technical eyes on monitoring the system, and a human to help look after people. So that ongoing role continues. Who knows, that could then give rise to bringing in electric vehicle charging, or I don't know, growing virgin plant pots outside the house. So you've got that community-based element to it.
Great, thanks, Louise. I'm going to go to, it's not the top, but there was a question around the biggest barriers to this kind of project that policymakers could reduce. And that feels like one that perhaps all the panel might have an opinion on. Shall we start with Phil? What's your top of your wish list?
I mean, there's a few things there around direct policy support, including recognition in local planning at the value of ambient loop clusters, which don't factor typically in any survey, any local energy plan, any appraisal. I think one of the things we're also looking at closely with ENWL is there's a real grey area around what's considered a commercial scheme and what's considered a domestic scheme, and we breach those. And if you consider it a commercial deployment, so for example, providing PV at scale on rooftops, if that causes an issue for the network, then under the current sort of regime, they can expect to give you a commercial connection cost for that based on reinforcement requirements. Whilst if it's a domestic scheme, they don't. And that can have a big bearing on the financial model, of course. And the way this model's set up is there's a lot of domestic ownership, but commercial provisions. So it's not explicit policy aspect, but it is something that really does need to be cleared up for schemes like this, for smart local energy systems that are binding different domestic schemes together.
Great, thanks, Phil. That's a good one. Andy.
Yeah, I'd echo what Phil said, but I think for me, I think a lot of government grant is targeted kind of at the individual, and I know it's heading in the right direction with Warm Homes Local Grant and kind of postcodes and that kind of thing. But seeing more of an area-based kind of retrofit scheme government support would really help push these along. That can kind of pick these up and to a point be a bit more flexible in terms of what's included within that kind of grant amount. And you know, I know a lot of them are means tested and kind of where they're at, but they're, you know, that can lead to people who just fall outside of that bracket. Thresholds have been going up and up, as you know, rightly so, but there are people that still sit just in kind of that technically they kind of, in the government side, can afford to pay for it, but they don't have enough money to be able to do this. So it's opening that up and kind of doing, you know, the infilling that's part of eco and other projects that can pull through into kind of this lovely all singing, all dancing area based. Let's get everything in people's homes. Let's make everybody's homes nice and warm and cozy. And kind of rose tinted glasses. Let's not worry about the cost, but have it so that it is kind of universal and kind of be able to be aggregated across that area to help support people that might need it slightly more than others.
Great, thank you. Natalie, from a local authority, what's your big barrier?
I would say, speaking sort of from a more local perspective, it's we're really looking into on a local level planning and the kind of intricacies that are involved in that, especially when you're doing retrofit at scale, and the having to put individual planning applications in would sort of clog out, especially if you're in a small local authority. That would take a lot of time and capacity to do, and it may also lead to delays. So we really have been sort of toying with this idea of a local development order for specific Net Zero Terrace Streets measures, which will be extremely helpful in the scheme of conservation areas, where you want to do install solar PV and replace windows and doors, especially in conservation areas. So making those permitted development would be crucial. And in terms of the process for that, I think it can vary depending on the complexity of the measures that you want to introduce to that, and it can also take up quite a lot of officer time and capacity. So I think a kind of message in terms of capacity building within local authorities, and also kind of a way to make it more accessible and more streamlined for local authorities to implement. That would be key.
Great, thanks, Natalie. Phoebe.
I'd obviously love on a policy level to address the spark gap. That's something that is a huge barrier. I guess on the community engagement side of things, because there are quite a few communities where an innovation project has started and there's been a promise of a next phase and it's maybe not gone through, and we've been very fortunate to be able to bring in lessons learned from previous projects, but I think an overall movement to really capture collaboration across communities, but also across innovation projects and other organisations like all of ourselves, to think about this on a wider strategy of how do we actually go towards this goal, and how do we work together to provide that continuity so that the communities know that they can trust, and they know that they can ask the right questions, and they can see case studies, and there's then this buy-in from investors. And I'm sure that's something that Louise would definitely agree with, of just being able to bring this narrative and keep that continuity, because we've got momentum. Something that I would very much like to see.
Great, thanks. And finally, Louise, I know we'll have lots to say on this.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been ticking off all the points I've written down. Just to build on the point Andy was making about area-based schemes, we've become very reliant on either an incentive or a grant. So if we've come to expect grant, we've got grant thinking by local authorities. So they wait for the grant, then they do a scheme. And whilst we've got lots of initiatives looking at blended schemes where we're layering in and bringing in private investors, apart from somewhere like Bristol or discrete ones for heat networks, it's quite hard to see that working. So actually, we're almost held back by the reliance on grants. So in a way, would we like to see that those area grants are coming through to local areas in a non-competitive way, perhaps looking at a postcode area, but saying, we want to see how you're layering in some social investment or some local authority investment through a joint venture or a UK Wealth Fund, for example, bearing in mind that councils are less likely to borrow at the moment because of the council situation financially. So that's something that could be a game changer, is to sort of say 50% of this grant has to leverage in extra funds. That would be something I'd be asking Ed Miliband to do. Inclusion in heat network zoning, I think, or heat zones would be important, because at the moment that's the focus towards sort of commercial heat networks with big anchor loads. So how does that work for houses? Could this become sort of recognised under that policy? And then lastly, statutory undertaker status for the drilling companies. At the moment, you have to go through planning permission and permission to shut highways. And so being able to speed that up in the way that gas and electricity and water utilities can come in, shut the street, do the work, get out, would take a layer of funding out, of cost out, and speed up and make it cheaper to do. So those are my ones, just finishing off on the shopping list of policy asks.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. So we've covered, I think, quite a lot of the questions, but there's one asking, I guess, one of the bigger themes, which is about replication. They want to know, is this solution applicable to other rural areas, to villages, to the communities that they live in? So yeah, what's the thinking around the replication of this in terms, I guess, a bit more on the technical, like how dense are the houses, what's the sort of geology and that sort of thing? Is that a Phil question? Or?
I mean, I can say the solution that we've come up with is applicable pretty much anywhere. The reason that we've called it Net Zero Terrace is because of the segment that we're focused on to unlock, that haven't got certain other options around deploying an air source heat pump, and also driving ourselves to look at that area where how can we alleviate poverty as well, and allow people to access it. But from a technical standpoint, we've done studies on ambient loop systems and community energy schemes in rural villages, in oil burning villages, and moving them off. They work, the models work. You can deploy them there. The community integrated system and SLES can work for any type of building archetype. It's not limited to terraced homes. So there's a real opportunity to look at scale, not just in small terrace streets and rural context, but in looking at evolving the learning that we're collecting from this system into other types of communities as well.
Great. Phoebe, did you want to come in on the sort of digital solution, the replicability of that?
Yes. So as a team, we've been building this 7-stage methodology for the Net Zero Terrace Streets, and that is very much working with a new community that is thinking about starting a Net Zero Terrace Street solution. And it's a working together to try and determine how this could apply to your community. So we've had this going throughout the whole project. Everything has come back to how do we learn from this to then replicate it? And part of that is the people side of things, and those conversations and sitting down and looking at the community and pointing on the map, where do we think this could work? What community knowledge do you have? What have we learnt from our previous schemes? And part of that is then, as we move through the stages, it's then finding more funding together, or using the tools that we've been creating in this project, or in our previous projects as well, that helps with that hand-holding. So there's an element of hand-holding, and it's really about that collaborative piece of what we've learnt and what the community knows already and is wanting to do, and working out together how we can move through those stages to really get to that replication piece.
Great, thank you. We've got quite a techie one that maybe is one for Andy that's floated to the top here, because we're talking a bit more generally, which was asking about, I guess, hot water storage, but also about flexibility. I think just more generally, like how important is that sort of flexibility of the scheme? That, you know, you mentioned the SLES and the network impact. Andy or Phil or Louise?
I can talk to the we're looking at using the Mixergy hot water tanks in the properties. So we're looking at using them as it's kind of that not quite heat battery, but hot water storage, and we're looking to develop the SLES system to be able to essentially help with heating that as and when. So it will just kind of charge up when there's excess solar or excess storage in kind of battery that can help kind of essentially charge it for free. But the flexibility as a whole will help, Phil said before, help us kind of add that additional layer to this that will drive down costs for people even more. You know, a big scary time of use tariffs, you know, don't make a lot of sense at the moment for most people. Able to pay, able to play. I think our director says at the moment you can plug into those kind of flexible variable tariffs and start getting out some real good things. So, you know, it's a big piece of this that if we can unlock that kind of side of flexibility, we can give that to people that are not now in a position to be able to get the cheaper kilowatt hours, and it'll help them, you know, drive down energy costs, which a lot of people need.
Yeah.
We've categorized flexibility into 4 items. One is thermal management to get more heat pumps into the networks if that's needed. So that may not be needed. It's a flexible option. One is voltage management to get more PV into the system. That may or may not be needed depending on the network. The other is flexibility around bill management, which is what Andy's sort of talked about, getting bills down, exploiting tariffs, exploiting community energy when it's available. And the other one that is worth mentioning is national balancing, because there's a huge value for aggregating the storage capability, whether that's hot water storage or batteries, and the demand controls in the homes. We did a quick calculation that said we can get 12 gigawatts of thermal response from the target 6 million homes into the national system. That's a significant portion of national flexibility requirement. And it's a marginal cost because that's just embedded into the system. So you're not paying extra to put that flexibility in, it's just there. So if you can get a payment for leveraging it, why wouldn't you? So that's another aspect we're looking at.
Okay, thanks, Phil. We are reaching towards the end of this. We've got 6 minutes left, but our top question was around, I guess, how households have been reacting. So I imagine this is sort of going back to Phoebe a little bit, but how have they perceived barriers to involvement in the scheme? And do you think there's more research required with householders to understand their sort of level of acceptance of this type of approach? Shall I go to Louise with that one first, and then maybe to Phoebe?
Yeah, thank you. So we've done small focus groups in the run up to this with some local people in the area, and then there's been a lot of understanding built up from our local energy advisors, our energy champions, about what people's questions and concerns are. But there's been a bit of chicken and egg in that we haven't got a scheme ready to offer yet, because we're waiting to see if we can get some pilot funding. So there's been a sort of element of reluctance to go out and blast the area with, what do you think about this? So there are plans for a survey and a set of focus groups with local people. And I've run a focus group in a different area with some older people, all of whom were pensioners, who were very keen on having fixed bills and knowing what their bills were going to be. There is some variety of questions about the way the system works, who looks after it, and how the heat pumps work, and so on. And then we've got 2 other opportunities to speak to people in some terraces where I live. And I did an informal session at the weekend where someone said, why can't we have shared heat pumps? And it was like, oh, you can. So there's more work to be done on that, actually. And I think it's somebody else who's not on this panel at the moment who's taking that work forward. But if it was Carlton asking that question in Bradford, if you're working with terrace street dwellers near where you're based, and I know you've got terraces outside of your office, it might be we can send over some questions, and it might be possible for you to do a sort of focus group of your own and then feed your results back in, because that would be really helpful to us. I think, Phoebe, have you got any other insights on that one?
I think the only other insight is the fact that, so Jenny is leading the energy advice team, and as Louise has said, we're focusing a lot on that building trust piece, because we know that within Rossendale we really need to focus on building trust and before we can then bring this solution. And so we have been looking at small focus groups, and we are, now that we have this platform and we have a more solid idea and the trust of the community members with the whole energy advice team, we're now starting that process of the surveys and the barriers, understanding them better.
Great. Well, we have 3 minutes to go, and I've been thinking of my wrap-up question for you all, because it's always good to hear from people. I guess this is about lessons learned from the project so far. So I might just ask you what you think your key lesson learned, slightly different from the policy barrier. Yeah, what would you like people to take away, or what do you think they should learn from the project so far? I'm going to start with Natalie.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Poppy. A key lesson for me is, again, build your relationships internally in your local authorities. It's a huge sort of impact when you do that. So we were lucky enough to have some sessions with our local planning team. We hosted a workshop with them and another local authority. Almost, I want to say almost a year ago. I think it was September actually, but that was really successful, and it's helping to sort of secure that buy-in. So yeah, and early engagement is key. That was 2 lessons, but yeah, there we go.
Thanks. Andy.
Natalie's just stolen mine. Early engagement, I was going to say, but build your external relationships, to echo it, to go out to supply chain, go out to contractors, and have those conversations early on, so that you can develop this in a way that's as seamless as possible. You know, we've got architectural designers on designing the retrofit for us, and we've got the contractors that are doing it, and then they're subcontracting. So there's a lot of actors and a lot of different organisations in this, and the earlier that you get them in to have those internal conversations, the easier the process is to go out to a householder, and then there's less issues with things going wrong or designs changing or whatnot. Then you know, they've got those relationships then, and they don't necessarily need to have that person in the middle who's kind of passing notes backwards and forwards, because you know, they're not used to talking to each other. So building up those external relationships early on is really good.
Great. Bill, it might be a bit harder for a model, but I'm sure there's some lessons learned there.
I mean, I think the key thing for me, without sort of getting into the sort of techie stuff, is the momentum this is building and what's possible, because we started walking around 3 terrace streets, just working out how to decarbonise them. Now we're one of the Net Zero Living, you know, Pathfinder projects. We've got CIF support. Rossendale Valley Energy has been formed in that time, as is Looped Community Energy, CIC, as a delivery outfit. We've got 3 DNO supporting us. We haven't talked about the team in Wales, South Wales, that's looking to deploy this model that we're working closely with in the valleys in Wales as well. We've already got geographical stretch, and we've got followers that are talking to us now. So I think the big takeout is that you can build interest if there's a real case for it, and we're happy and want to include others in that journey now as well, which is why we're communicating this way, to bring people along with us, to share our learning. We haven't got all the answers, but we've got a problem that we need to solve, and we've got some ideas around how to do it.
Thanks. Phoebe.
I'll be quick because I know of our time. It's taking that step back and listening, understanding what the challenges are, and you know, when you've got that replication approach in mind, you then have the opportunity to learn from any mistakes or lessons learned, and be able to keep coming back to it and being agile and seeing how you can adapt as a team. So yeah, listening and taking a step back.
Thanks. And then Louise, you started, so I'm going to let you finish.
Yeah, lastly, people will tell you why you can't do it and why it can't be done. And we've bumped into barriers, and we're working through those barriers. But something has to be done, because we have to decarbonise heat and improve these houses. So you hit a wall. It's not impossible. There's always a possibility, and it's a really strong partnership aiming to do that in a very honest way. We're very open about what we're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's been fascinating for me, and hopefully for everybody else on the call. I'm sorry we're a minute over for chairing, but yes, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to the panelists for their great contributions.